Yeah. So that's kind of an extension of almost the Tory customer promise into state pensions. That's the spirit of what that is. And I don't think that's necessarily going to hold.
No.
Okay, well, this is a tech podcast. I don't know what you're talking about. It's just gone on about politics for ages.
Started during lockdown, needed something to do. They looked at each other, they said, hey, I like talking to you. And so from a garden shed in a box room in West London, they're discussing tech. It's the Small Time Bets podcast.
So loads of stuff has happened since I last spoke to you. I've got COVID, I went on holiday, I came back, many events, started a new job,
Very busy times.
I've been glued to the news because UK politics became an international talking point.
It did, didn't it? So anyway, there's quite a lot I wanted to talk to you about, I guess, UK situation, markets, potential UK financial crisis and how close we were to it. And then there's been loads of tech things. So Google, Meta and Microsoft all had like big events. So I think we need to cover all of those. In the time we've been away, Liz Truss has decided she's resigned. And we're going to have another Prime Minister. So that's fun.
You're not really describing it properly, are you? The series of events.
Can I give you the series of events from a people's favourite for the next PM? This summary. So see if you can guess who this was from. Very, very popular person on Twitter. So for those asking around the world how Britain has gotten into this mess, the Conservative Party has always been obsessed with Europe. This caused divides, making the party hard to manage. Back in 2015, the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, had an idea. He promised a referendum on the UK's membership of the EU if he won the election. He did win the election. The referendum was held. 52% of people voted to leave the EU, and David Cameron resigned. Then we had Theresa May. She became Prime Minister saying that Brexit means Brexit. It turned out that nobody actually knew what Brexit meant. She called an election and lost a majority. She couldn't get the Conservative Party to agree on a Brexit deal, so she quit. Then we had Boris Johnson, who became Prime Minister promising to get Brexit done. He called a general election and won a huge majority. The UK left the European Union in January 2020. Major Brexit issues remain unresolved and has negatively impacted the UK economy. Boris Johnson was forced to resign in disgrace in July 2022 following a series of scandals. Then Liz Truss was selected to replace Boris Johnson by members of the Conservative Party. She announced a raft of unfunded tax cuts to grow the economy. The economy collapsed. She sacked her Chancellor. She resigned. Finn. Do you know who that's from?
No.
That's Larry the cat. The number 10 cat on Twitter, who a lot of people have been putting photoshopped versions of the cat on the podium as potential next for the PM. I think currently the fan favourite's the lettuce, but Larry the cat's a close number 2 at the moment. I can't believe this is real. Anyway, that was quite a good summary, I thought. A refresher course. So yeah, what do you take of it?
I think the things you remember each leader for is different, right? So, I mean, Theresa May always will be remembered in my mind as running through cornfields. It's like Theresa May wasn't very good, but now with Liz Truss, I realise how bad you could be. You could be much worse. Like, you could be just a talentless hack of low calibre and no real capability. A person who doesn't understand how sentences work or how to be in the room. Physically presently in the room. Like, what is the topic that's being spoken about? She doesn't know. No. I don't think she understands language.
I think the Peter Principle. It's like popular in the Dilbert comics that you get promoted to your highest level of incompetence. I think she's a perfect example of that. Just someone who has just reached an office way beyond anything that she's actually capable of doing. But I mean, it highlights kind of a lot of problems with the UK political system, but the interesting thing that I found from all of this was, so it's important to note, like, she sees the Queen passes away, we go through a period of mourning. That was skipped in that summary. And even then, even though there was a good 2.5 weeks of just nothing, she then, even factoring that in, only lasted 44 days.
She really did mess up, didn't she? I guess the starting point was having some ideas about economics that go against the orthodoxy. And then off the back of that, everything follows, right? So you don't then run it through the Office for Budgetary Responsibility and you sort of sack your minders and you ensure that you go in hard and fast, a little too hard and fast.
And you don't brief anyone. You don't tell people what to expect. And then the markets don't like that.
So having unorthodox
generally.
economic ideas, is that such a crime? Well, it turns out it nearly crashed some pension funds and it massively raised the price of borrowing, and then for a vast swathe of the middle class, it's made their pensions almost potentially unmanageable and untenable. They might get their homes repossessed. So yeah, it does look like a crime, but how have we got ourselves into a space where the market decides? It's not like politicians decide or the Conservative Party membership decides or some think tanks decide or the country decides. The market decides.
No, that's a really true thing on this. I know there's a lot of criticism of her as a person and her policies and everything, but the market really did decide on this one for her and Kwasi Kwarteng, who was the Chancellor for, 20 days or something. And I guess it's a strange thing when you go in with this view of overconfidence, almost arrogance about what you're doing, because you have an ideological view of how the economy works, and that the key is to make tax really simple and to cut taxes and grow the economy, and it's all going to be wonderful, but you don't do the basic stuff of just getting someone to check your homework and say,
but
and we're going to pay for it with this.
If she had got the OBR to run the numbers, it would have shown bad outcomes. It would have shown that it's a bit of a gamble. We're getting into a hole, gambling on growth to get us out of the hole. So you can see why someone with her views, which is break the orthodoxy, break everything, would have gone in. And I guess what it means is that people with ideas like that for spurring growth, some of which it's a mixture of the definitely wrong, trickle down, and the possibly right, which is a low tax, low bureaucracy environment, might spur inward investment into the UK and encourage economic growth. So that mishmash of ideals, if someone else comes up with that now, they're drinking from a tainted well. That is a problem potentially. So no one else can run on this kind of ticket again. She's really tainted it.
No, there's a timing thing on this, right? There's a timing, and there's this idea of having a mandate to do stuff, right? If you were elected by the people in a general election for this really low tax, high growth, lean, mean, libertarian machine thing, and it was a time when the world economy could kind of factor that in, and the markets, and when I say the markets, it's people who are it's investors, it's people who are interested in where they allocate their capital, right? So if they look at that and they're like, oh, that's interesting, you've got the backing of people are bought into this, you can get stuff done, fair enough. If you are essentially elected by 80,000 people with an average age of roughly 60 who live in the southeast of England, and Tory party members, who they're the people who voted you in, and you're in a period of 10% inflation, over a decade of really poor growth, which has been your whole party's been in power for, and then we're heading probably into a global recession. That's probably not the time to do completely unfunded tax cuts, and that's where it looks really weird. Especially, I think, even though it's a small amount of money, cutting the top rate of tax, I don't know who was cheering that. I think I was listening to a podcast on the Financial Times one where they had one of the Chelsea Football Club owners on there, and he was just saying none of the people he knows who are in that bracket wanted that. They all felt a bit guilty, a bit dirty of suddenly they're getting a tax break potentially worth £40,000-50,000 extra for them per year and more. Meanwhile, everyone else is going to food banks. It's just no one's good, that's exactly what we needed and that's good for the economy. I don't think it was a very popular thing anywhere. Anyway, I digress. Did you see the lettuce?
I never actually watched The Lettuce. It's on Daily Star. So I noticed that it did a song at the end when it won.
It did a speech.
Yeah.
So
Lots of puns.
It came up in The Economist. Like a few weeks ago, The Economist talked about Liz Truss, talked about how it looked very much like she'd be a short-lived Prime Minister, and that if you take away the time that we spent mourning the Queen, that actually her time in office hadn't really gone much more than the shelf life of a lettuce. And some genius at the Daily Star, don't know who, but they definitely should get a promotion. They kind of ran with it. Live stream YouTube. They dressed up the lettuce with googly eyes and everything. They put it next to a picture of Liz Truss, and they literally said, "Will this lettuce outlast Liz Truss?" And a lot of people thought, "Oh, it might do." And actually, it still looks pretty fresh, to be honest. In the picture, they went all with the lights. They went with the things. They did lots of dad jokes, lots of lettuce puns. Lots of romaine, lettuce puns.
Yeah, I get it.
And now she has to leave office. Just all the puns are in there. I think it was just a strange thing where the simulation is definitely broken, and now we are literally watching all the strange idiosyncrasies just rain down around us because, we've had, 4 chancellors, potentially we're going to have a 3rd Prime Minister this year. This Prime Minister has lasted about the lifespan of a fruit fly, which is quite, fruit fly apparently lives around 40 to 50 days. So surprisingly short for the political system that we're in at the moment. Oh, quick question.
It's bad, isn't it?
The next PM potentially could be Boris Johnson again if it goes to the members. The way they're doing it is they've set the bar at like 100 MPs have to back you for you to get through. But if there are 2 that have that, then they'll put it to the members, another 80,000 people in the Conservative Party voting on it. But they're going to do it really quickly by next Friday, like online. And I wondered, do you not think that is an absolute email phishing honey trap just waiting to happen?
Yeah, so I was wondering how they were going to do it because last time they had people showing up to their local town hall and it was a real faff.
It took a ballot box.
It took an incredible amount of time, like 2 months or something.
Yeah.
And
they're doing it in a week.
If we did that again, I'm fairly sure our economy would collapse. Like the cost of borrowing would rise again massively. Like we can't be doing postal ballots in this climate. So they've done the right thing, but they'll probably, I think they're taking a gamble. And if it looks like it's going to go that way, then they have to institute some system that they'll get off the shelf, which involves posting people a physical letter with a code that they then have to input into that online system. It'll be one of those.
They've not got enough time. And the Royal Mail are constantly striking. So it's like between now and Friday, they have to have done that. I don't know how that's going to work. But the reason I was thinking is, genuinely, Conservative Party membership, I looked on fullfact.org, the average age of a Conservative Party member is about 57. More than half of them are over 60. How many of them have the online security know-how to really, to not be susceptible to probably quite targeted phishing attacks? If I'm a foreign power and I want to interfere, this is a great opportunity, right?
It's a hard one to figure out, though, isn't it? So what? Okay, so say you're working on behalf of Putin's FSB, and you want to destabilise the UK. What is your best bet now? Like, well, like on the one hand, Boris, when he said "Hasta la vista, baby," did he know that Liz was so bad? Does Dominic Cummings call her the human hand grenade because when you push her into a room, like all hell breaks loose, just so chaotic? Everything she does is chaotic.
You know what's really funny? It was tweeted out by the Rest is Politics, I think, earlier today, because they've been talking about this a lot, Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell. But it's absolutely...
Rory Stewart is the guy who ran as a candidate, right?
Yeah. So if you've not been listening to the Rest of Politics, you need to listen to it. It's a fantastic podcast. Anyway,
it's a funny one, isn't it? Because he looks like a sort of like a ventriloquist dummy. But he
He-
was
he's
actually
been-
a candidate, and he's now beginning to seem one of the most credible people. If you can just kind of get over his awkwardness.
Oh no, he's the president I give directly now. He doesn't do politics. He just talks about it on a podcast and has way more influence. But anyway, it was really, really fascinating because way back in 20th of July, Dominic Cummings basically tweeted out, I guess it's a snippet from his memoirs and stuff, basically saying that Boris was supporting Liz Truss because he knows she's mad and he thinks she'll blow it up and he can make a comeback. And it's kind of prescient at this point. It's like Rishi Sunak, been prescient about the economy because everything he said would happen roughly played out that way, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But I think Dominic Cummings also, I don't like Dominic Cummings, but he's really hit the nail on the head on this one because saying that in July, Boris goes, Liz lasts 40 odd days and Boris potentially could be back by next Friday. Yeah. What a weird country we live in.
So, taking a step back, like, it is like pit of the stomach, sort of sick-inducing, exciting, like the way a roller coaster is. But it is also horrible and has real-world consequences. And all the while this stuff is happening, there was, the government wasn't just there for our amusement and entertainment like a telenovela. They are meant to be doing something to do with running the country, making choices, difficult decisions, and allocating resources and capital and setting the tone, and there's just loads of stuff they're meant to be doing. And we're in the middle of a global everything crisis. So they're not there for this. They're not doing the thing that they're supposed to be doing. It's really bad. Where was I going with that? It's a dearth of talent. Like, I guess one way of thinking about it is after 12 years you will run out of talent. But I don't see that much on the other side of the house either. So politics became a thing that you don't really want to go into. It's not worth it. The good people are not there. And now we do have a problem. Like, one of the ways that continental Europe is dissing us to our faces is they're saying, oh yeah, well, it all started with Brexit, the kind of magical thinking that gets you into thinking that Brexit is the right thing, the kind of post-empire delusion that winds you up in such a place that you think that Britain should go it alone. And therefore you've ended up following that route of magical thinking down into this very wrong path. That's the sort of smug Schadenfreude line. I don't completely disagree with it, but there's so many things going wrong. It isn't just that. That's a sort of central problem in the Conservative Party. That's what's going wrong there. But there's deeper things going wrong all the way through. It doesn't look good that a lot of our institutions are failing.
No, I agree. It's been going wrong for a long time, though. I think it's now just it's accelerating, snowballing. Like, I was joking with someone that, at the rate we're going through PMs and going through essentially the entire Tory party taking a turn at running things, we could just get into a quick, Boris could come back. He's under investigation anyway for breaking the ministerial code and breaking the law and all sorts of things. He could be back out and then they could do another thing and then Liz could be back in and they could just kind of do this like Russian dolls that get incrementally less talented as you go, and then they'll end up doing like an online vote your favourite this week, who will run, like a game show. It's ironic that there's like a Who Wants to Be Prime Minister TV show being run by Alistair Campbell at the moment, trying to find out who's got the calibre to be a PM. The whole thing is a game show. And it kind of has got to that point where it does need a bit of an overhaul, but you're not going to get it for years. I think this will play out and get a lot worse before it gets better, I think. And speaking of things getting worse, how close was the UK to a true financial crisis? The gilt market, the pension funds,
So what we're hearing is that several pension funds were ringing up the Bank of England and shouting down the phone. And the reason why is because they, just to take an example, I think the BT one had already lost maybe 20 billion in value since the start of the year. But then in the course of a week or so, or a day or so, it lost another 30 billion. The problem for fixed value pension funds, so example final salary pension funds, was that they had got themselves into margin call position where they had to sell some of their holding, but that was itself triggering a spiral, lowering the cost of the gilts, aka bonds, and that's why the Bank of England intervened to the tune of 45 billion.
I think 65, wasn't it?
It's how because they upped it.
Oh, okay.
There was a point at which they were going to dial it down, and then they said, I'm not going to do that, actually, I'm going to put in more. There were a few pension funds that were going to collapse if it hadn't been for that Bank of England intervention. Before Liz Truss's resignation, before Kwasi Kwarteng was called back from Washington, there was a point at which the Bank of England said, so just so everyone knows, Friday is the day that we're going to stop with our 5 billion per day top up. Yeah. And I am not extending it. You have to get your house in order if you're a pension fund. And at that point, it was a nice line in the sand, because the tension is between the Bank of England being the lender of last resort to stop things falling over badly, versus the Bank of England just bailing out an absolutely shambolic government. And they said, okay, we did that second role. It's not one we generally like to stay in for a long period of time. You've had your 2 weeks, you've had your 10 days, we'll move on. We're not going to continue.
And have they stopped it?
So what hasn't happened is the quantitative tightening we hit the pause button on QT because it seems too risky to start selling bonds.
Mm. It's kind of weird though, because I went down this rabbit hole where, bonds and pensions are probably two of the most boring financial topics that you can, given that we talk about Bitcoin and crypto and the future of everything, and then bonds and pensions are just normally, snore alert, they're very boring. For good reason, right? Because they're slow and stable and long-term assets that are just, you're lending to the government and you're lending over like a 30-year period in some cases. It's not really something that's very exciting. And I've gone down this rabbit hole of like figuring out how it all works, because you did get, there's an element of this, a huge element, which is just the government just being piss poor and actually making it so much worse because people lose faith in the UK as a market. There's another part of it where that kind of was a systemic risk anyway. You basically had a system where, I never realised this, but the UK gilts go out to like 10, 20, 30 year bonds. Other countries don't do that. They don't have such long-term ones. And at the shorter end, your kind of 1 year, 5 year ones, it's hedge funds, and a lot of people those are quite liquid. 20, 30 year bonds, or gilts rather, in the UK, it's just pension funds really that use them as the assets that hopefully over a long enough time allow them to pay off the liabilities they have in people's pensions. And then there's a 25% they use to trade and hedge against like other more, with leverage against other things in the market, because the returns normally on gilts are so low that you have to do that. But when you are forced to sell gilts because of these margin calls, like this happened, this massive acceleration of people dumping gilts, the only other buyers in that market are pension funds. There's not a liquid market of buyers. So it wasn't that the Bank of England came in as a lender, it's actually as a market maker. They literally had to provide liquidity so that it didn't run to zero.
They were a buyer of last resort.
Well, they're a buyer of last resort, but actually it's the market making functionality that's needed in that to stop it. We've seen it in crypto where you get basically a Terra Luna situation of just everyone selling, no one buying. The price will go to zero. And you kind of had a situation with the pension funds where they are designed to rebalance every, day, week, month, quarter, not every hour or every minute. They're not high frequency traders. So you don't expect the Chancellor of the UK to announce something so unexpected that everyone literally panics and hits the sell button, because you can't rebalance your portfolios. A lot of them are very illiquid things because you're dealing with 30-year bonds and a pension, these very long-term things. It was a kind of thing where there's an element of systemic risk. If you look at the chart, the rates for bonds going back centuries really are boring. They're like flat lines, like a very, very, very steady gradient. And then you just get this like huge spike that you have to zoom in on like literally the minute to see how quickly it's moving. That was never in the history of any of the markets. So they didn't plan for that. They don't model that risk, whereas now they kind of have to. And the weird part of that is if you have to model that level of risk, what you then do is you factor that into how much do you really price into lending the UK government money if they're going to just be this irresponsible, and now it's priced in forever. Every model will be like, well, you just never know what these crazy people will do. I think it screwed the country for a long, long time.
It's a real damage to credibility, but it's also shows the weakness of a system which would allow people who are going to behave like that close to the levers of power. So there should have been, the way that the system's supposed to work is there are a series of filters and balances and unspoken understandings that prevent people going back right the way from public school to the Oxford Union, right the way through to, who knows who, and has been given the nod from the 1921 committee.
22.
And
Which
it's
is
like,
the strange thing.
And so it's, it was all loosely being held together by an understanding, we thought. And then
this happened.
So Mavericks got through, and they're in the control room, and they were just like playing around with stuff. And then that obviously will have an effect, longer term. Now, the cost of borrowing is, I guess, the one where it's really shooting you in the foot. So if you announce this and then it impacts your own cost of borrowing, and it's operating on a week-by-week basis, like now this week the cost of borrowing is considerably higher and it hasn't gone back down, and that affects anything that the future PM can come in and do. That's very serious. And then the mortgage thing, the banks have not rebalanced and gone back and said, okay, now we're going to lower the mortgage rates again. The mortgage rates have gone up, and it's a ratchet. So if you need to remortgage now, you're at a higher rate than you were before. That's really bad news for a swathe of homeowners. The whole thing about the UK political racket is the wheezes. It's a pyramid scheme where if we give the middle class homes that we say are worth $1 million, then they will continue to vote for probably conservative policies because they feel wealthier. And the way we make them feel good about themselves is we don't build any new homes, and we try and do the same thing with council homes as well, allow people to buy those, enfranchise them into the mentality of being a property owner, and you just want that number to go up. So that's the pyramid scheme. Within that paradigm, if you make it possible to lose your home even though you did nothing wrong, just because there's like a freak event and suddenly interest rates are way higher than you could reasonably have anticipated, having been spoon-fed on this now. We've been in 0% for a while. We've been on low single-digit percentage for a while. And even back when it was 14, 15% interest rates, those were with much lower house prices as percentage of income.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is really a tsunami. It's going to hit a lot of people. It's really bad.
And also, when you had those high interest rates, culturally, we weren't fed this narrative of like consumption and buying things on credit, and you didn't have credit cards, Klarna, buy now, pay later, all the other things that make it a lot easier to be really over leveraged in the credit system. And then you've got people are really going to suffer, and it's not nice.
Why do we care more about those people suffering than the people who are suffering because they can't afford petrol to drive to work, or they're relying on food banks and warmth banks during a brutal winter? It's like the middle class has always driven politics, and that's the same with this mortgage crisis. And the mortgage crisis is the one that's really rattled it shakes the Conservative Party to its core, because if you cannot protect
They're the
the middle
voters.
class, then
That's
you're
it.
out. You're out on your ear.
It's not that. I mean, it sounds really dehumanizing, but it's not about like caring more or less about people from a suffering perspective. It's from a politics perspective, they crunch the numbers, and it's pretty dire because the Conservative base is homeowners, really, and a lot of those homeowners are really going to struggle. And it's either the homeowners who have mortgages to pay who are going to struggle, or the homeowners who've paid off their mortgage but now rely on a pension, who are now probably a bit more nervous because that pension is not as guaranteed.
I remember when the pensions triple lock was brought in, it was like, but this is only for state pensions.
Yeah, not private pensions.
Yeah. So that's kind of an extension of almost the Tory customer promise into state pensions. That's the spirit of what that is, and I don't think that's necessarily going to hold.
No.
Okay, well, this is a tech podcast. I don't know what you're talking about, because you've just gone on about politics for ages.
Does seem it.
Then I think it's time for This Week in the Markets.
Yes, tell me.
Okay, so This Week in the Markets, basically everything went up 3% this week, but because we've been away for a while, let's zoom out a month. So broadly speaking, S&P 500 kind of level pegging, and the Nasdaq went down 2% before it went up 3% this week, and that was This Week in the Markets.
I was reading this theory on MarketWatch, this like external columnist, basically talking about.
Most of those articles are written by bots.
No, this one wasn't. He's like a real person, but it was interesting because it made me think and this is very US centric, not really. We've talked about the UK enough, but from a US perspective, inflation historically falls just as fast as it goes up. So it's been going up loads, and it can fall just as quickly. And usually when you hit like a recession of some sort. So if we do enter that, and the US looks like it is, and the Fed stops hiking rates and essentially, reacts to address that, especially if unemployment increases and if inflation starts going down, is that the interesting cue to enter the stock market from an investment perspective? Because it feels at the moment like in the US side, maybe the bottom is in or in sight. I talked to Jen about this, and she's like, absolutely not. You're being way too optimistic. But I just feel like sometimes, even in a recession, even when people's lives are awful, the markets and the people's allocation of capital often doesn't always reflect it, right? So in that situation, do you see a kind of market bottoming and recovery?
So tuning in every week, as I do, to the besties on the All In podcast.
Oh yeah, what did they say?
So, it's Chamath Palihapitiya. It's his line, really. He says it's around about time that you ought to look at getting back in. And it's because the stock market operates as a kind of leading indicator. And although there will still be some rough patches to go, now would be the time to get back in.
Yeah. Okay, that's kind of what I thought.
Now,
Yeah.
in the UK, one thing you might think about doing is selling your house, renting for 2 years, and then buying at a 30% discount.
Oh, wow. Bold prediction.
Not the same place, a better, nicer place.
Bold prediction. That's
At a 30% discount.
That makes an assumption that you can actually sell your house.
Well, but you have to sell it quite fast.
I don't know how you're going to. I don't think you can sell a house right now. I think you'll get house prices won't fall because it'll be like the NFT market where there's no volume.
Liquidity.
It's
There's
like,
no liquidity,
the
and
house
no one can
prices
get
are-
a mortgage.
Literally,
So
the bank won't offer you a mortgage.
There's no pricing mechanism. Jonathan, what's this week's not a sponsor?
So it's a very apt thing for your home office. I work from home a lot. I like to keep a tidy office, and I don't want to go downstairs and get the vacuum cleaner and like assemble it and come upstairs and everything because it's only a desk and like the things around the desk. And I found, I looked through the reviews and I was like, I don't want
I'm really hoping this is going to be a tiny Roomba.
It's the Shark cordless handheld vacuum cleaner, WV200. And it's tiny. And it's really good at just like vacuuming around your desk and like around the plugs and the floor and like, you know, just the immediate part of keeping things tidy. And it has like an 8-minute battery life. So it's not the sort of thing you're not going to vacuum the house, but it's really quick to charge, empty, vacuum, very powerful. It just works. So home office essentials. And it looks really nice as well. It's like
how much is it in UK pounds?
Well, I got it on there's that Amazon Prime sale the other day. So it was £70.
£70 for an 8-minute vacuum.
You can reuse it. So more
What's
than
that in
you
dollars?
can do 8 minutes. That's
literally about $70.
That's like $12 or something. It depends when you're listening to this. If you're like, it may be no dollars. It may come free with a Big Mac. Don't write it off. It's a really good and practical vacuum
It's
cleaner.
not for me to tell you how to spend your cost of living crisis money, but that is great. Thank you for this week's not a sponsor.
I'm telling you, this is a useful thing if you want to vacuum your bedroom, your like whatever room it's in. It's good around that room. There's been a lot of tech things that happened in the last. We've been off for too long. Like last month, it's been just Tech City. Can we
I've
start?
got some questions for you, yeah.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Well, where do you want to start?
I want to start with the Google one. I believe that was chronologically first.
Okay.
So the Google event, which was the big Pixel 7, Pixel Watch, everything Pixel.
Should I do a summary of it? So
Yeah.
people who are listening who want to know what Google's released.
I'm very excited for this summary.
Space. Yeah, so I guess the big summary then of the big Google event of 2022 is that nothing's really changed and there weren't really any new products. So it's like there's a phone, like you'd expect, there's 2 of them. They're a bit cheaper, they're not as good as iOS. They did do one thing, which is they put a tablet on a thing, but they're not going to tell anyone about what it really means. So there's like a tablet and it's on a base station. It's not clear if you buy them separately or they're the same. That was the one thing that they did that was a bit different. They've got dictation now, which is a bit like what Siri is, but presumably that's not as good. Also, you can take a selfie of yourself just by saying...
You're absolutely ruining our tech credentials. They've had dictation for longer than Siri, and it's been better than Siri for as long as it's been around. So, did you watch the thing?
Google Assistant gains a bunch of new smarts with voice typing, calling and transcription tools.
They've had voice typing forever. The difference with the voice typing one, if you watched it, is in their dictation one, they'll actually do multiple speakers from the same thing. So you literally put on a thing, you are in a room, and it will pull out individual speakers and do it the same way Descript does to transcribe each individual one by one. Yeah, you didn't watch it. It's actually really impressive. And the fact that they're doing that natively on the device through the Google Translate and Google Assistant modules, pretty damn impressive. So let me do a
new
summary,
generation.
Yours is just useless.
They have a new generation of the
You
tensor
can do the
chip,
Apple one.
but it's not real tensor. It's just pretend tensor. Okay, tell me what was good about this event in which 2 new cheap plasticky phones have been released.
Oh my God. Let me just tell you what happened at the event for a start. So it's the Pixel 7 event. They had the Pixel 7, they had the Pixel 7 Pro, they had the whole focus around the new Tensor G2 processor. It is incremental in the sense that, I have a 6 Pro and it's actually roughly the same. It's the same candy bar shaped phone. It's not folding. It doesn't have anything extra special in terms of the screen or the battery or anything more than that. It's all about the AI side and what they do around computational photography. So they now very much
the material on the back has changed, hasn't it?
Has it?
And no one can figure out why you'd go for the 7 Pro, because there's no real difference between the Pro compared to the 7.
No, there is a huge difference in the camera. It has a third camera.
It does a little bit more zooming, but 25x zoom is kind of meaningless because it's just more graininess. But please go on.
It's more the price level. It's
yes,
actually very affordably. Yeah, it's a very affordably priced at the 7. So Jen's got the 7, and it came with so if you get the 7, you get a free Pixel Buds, or you get a discount on the Pixel Watch. If you get the Pro, they were doing an offer where you get a free Pixel Watch, which actually is quite a good deal because it's like a £350, £380 smartwatch that they're throwing in. So that's actually a really big discount. So very competitive pricing, surprisingly. The phone is the phone. If you love pixels, you love the photography, I think it's probably the obvious one to get. If you're wedded to iPhones, to just ignore everything that we talk about for the next few minutes. If you have a Samsung phone and you're more about like the best in hardware, screen, everything, then it's not that. It's not trying to go for the hardware, it's trying to go for the software. And they've done it all on the Tensor. So the things like the transcription, picking out different voices, the amount of computational photography they're able to do in the device when it comes to the portrait mode, the stabilization, the cinematic like blur on video that they're doing is actually really impressive. It's great that they're like pushing that. But I looked at it and I was like, there's nothing game changing there from the Pixel 6 to Pixel 7. It's a nice upgrade if you can afford it and if it's the right time for you to upgrade. The one that I did want to talk about is actually the watch, because Jen's not a fan of smartwatches, but she did opt for that one. I think maybe a combination of the design and the fact that it is a Pixel watch. It's kind of accessible. It's kind of like an easy fit.
So this isn't the Fitbit Google Watch?
Well, no. So Google bought Fitbit a few years ago for, what was it, for like $2 billion or something? And then they just continued to run side by side. And then weirdly enough, Google also have Google Fit, which is like their health app, in the classic way that Google just loves to just confuse everyone with their damn multi-app system. This Pixel watch, it runs the whole like Wear OS Android version, but it also then has Fitbit like bolted on. So it's kind of strange. But if you're like Jen, you're coming from a Fitbit device, it actually makes sense, right? If you're in the app ecosystem, if you're coming from a different piece of hardware, it must be really awkward. But yeah.
So is this the one they would give you if you got the 7 Pro?
Yeah,
give this one away
on the pre-order, which is quite a big deal.
Insane, isn't it? If you think about like how a company is supposed to think about the margins on each hardware line, like Apple can't release a device without crossing a margin threshold, and in this one, they're prepared to bundle
only on pre-order.
Their premium, latest and greatest watch device with their highest end phone.
Mm-hmm. But their watch is actually, it's like £380 in the UK. It's pretty pricey for what it is if you're buying it outright. When you compare it to the Apple Watch, which in every aspect is just superior, right? So it's, yeah, in terms of like, they've definitely priced the watch very high end and the phones very competitively. However, the phones are built in India. They're doubling production. They're flying off shelves and you just can't get hold of them now. I think with the watch, what I found was really interesting is it looks beautiful, round screen, looks like a little black pebble. Not pebble watch, sorry, just like, an actual pebble. But then feature-wise, I compared it to, back in 2014, either Moto 360, one of the original Android Wear watches. Used to love it. And that's 8 years ago. And it had the round screen, 24-hour battery, turn-by-turn navigation, Google Assistant, the apps, the heart rate monitor, step count. It had a lot of the same stuff, just in a maybe not as great a screen, because it was 8 years ago. Not as great heart rate monitoring or speakers or any of that stuff, and it wasn't waterproof. But it actually had a lot, and it did make me think, as much as we rave about the Apple Watch and everything, the kind of incremental improvements, in 8 years, we haven't actually, like it's not really moved the needle much, right? And that surprised me a lot, because...
Yeah, I mean, if you compare it to the Moto 360, the latest Pixel Watch, I guess, how are you finding the border around the screen, the black border?
You can't see it because the whole screen is an OLED screen, and because the border is black as well. You actually can't tell. So when Jen's wearing, and it's a nice size, so for Jen's wrist, it actually looks really, really, really sleek. I think it's an ideal watch for a Fitbit person or for someone coming from that Pixel Android ecosystem. I don't think it's going to hold a candle to the latest and greatest Apple Watch. I mean, it's their first gen. Apple have been through this cycle a number of times.
Price-wise, it's on parity.
Yeah, weirdly enough.
Weird.
With, I think, the Apple Watch SE. So it's actually, at that level, you probably stick Apple Watch if you're an Apple ecosystem. But
do you get things that, so the SE doesn't do blood oxygen level, but it does do the heart rate monitoring and so on. You've got
interesting. So yeah, this does the blood oxygen, it does the ECG, it does all those.
Does it?
Yeah, so it actually has
ECG.
It has a lot of the it has all the stuff that actually, yeah, my Moto 360 obviously didn't do that, but I think it's more, the battery life sucks, the Fitbit integration's weird, but for what Jen needs it for is actually kind of ideal, right? We had a phone call on it, and I was like amazed by the microphone quality of this watch, and actually there's little things where it is actually
was she outdoors or
she was indoors, inside? So it's but like there's no echo, it's very very clear. It's a solid watch. The fact that it's bundled in with the Pro when you pre-order it is actually kind of impressive. But yeah, Google event, I think it's more the fact that Google are getting serious about hardware, and I appreciate that.
On hardware, it feels like they have finally got the ducks in a row with the phone, the buds, and the watch all working together and pulling together.
It looks like it. But I think they and with the whole, whether you believe it or not, the Tensor Silicon, the fact that they're trying to do more in-house and own the stack is actually quite important. Classic Google, obviously the Fitbit integration isn't great, and there's the gaps they need to close, but it is an interesting improvement.
So, but what I kind of heard you say was that there's this watch that doesn't make sense on price parity with the equivalent Apple device. There's these phones where you would never buy the more expensive one.
No, I would, because I rate having the additional camera. I think the additional cameras and the bigger screen actually depends on hand size and what you're looking for. But if you want the bigger screen, bigger battery life, maybe.
But the smaller one, the regular Pixel 7, is like shockingly good value.
Yeah.
But not that much different to the previous one apart from the back. And then that's what was announced.
Yeah, but they focus a lot on.
But like, how is what you said different from what I said? Which is that there kind of wasn't anything. There's just like some phones that not that different. The one thing that is different is that they nearly announced, finally, their mysterious tablet.
I'm waiting to see what happens with that one. I'm not. Android have never done a good tablet. It's the Google Home. It's a Google Home.
It's like. But you can detach it.
It's a detachable
for tablet
Google
mode.
Home. Yeah, it's a detachable Google Home, which is great. It's actually probably the one area that they
it's out next year.
Could do.
What's it going to be? Excited, aren't you? That's the one thing.
Absolutely not.
That's the one thing.
Your choice: Meta event or Microsoft?
I want to go Microsoft because of the hardware angle, because there's a good continuity.
Interesting.
So my question for you on this is going to be about Surface and Surface Pro. I thought the Surface is now looking a lot like a laptop. Is it a laptop? It's just a laptop, isn't it?
Oh wait, are you confusing it with the Surface laptop? There is the Surface is a whole range of products now. It's like Pixel.
Yeah. So there is a Surface.
There is a Surface laptop.
It's just a laptop, right? But then they're also doing the thing which was a tablet, and then you've got a sort of keyboard that you can click on.
That's the Surface
and then
Pro.
There's a kickstand, which if you get it at the right angle will slice through your legs like a machete. So there's that, but then the keyboard part of it looks so rigid and heavy that it is basically like a laptop. It's like they didn't understand what a tablet's meant to be, or what this new category defining thing was meant to be, and they just regressed back to what they know best, which is, can we just do a laptop?
Wait, one thing you've seen an iPad Pro, right?
One thing I did notice they were very keen on is that they finally... was I seeing butterfly keys in there? Is that, have they adopted
they've got keys for a keyboard.
A butterfly keyboard. Have they finally adopted the butterfly keyboard? Because there are some issues with that.
Yeah, Apple knew that well. They did the integration bit, so they were just like, which is interesting for Microsoft. Under Satya Nadella, they've been very open to integrating with formerly what the closed ecosystems, right? So integration with Apple TV. You can get your Apple TV on your Windows devices, which is cool.
And Apple TV Plus, and you can get Apple
Photos.
Music. And
Your
if you download the iCloud app for Windows,
which
then you can get your Apple Photos.
I can see that being a very, very practical
These
thing
things
for people.
were remarkable.
I
was
didn't expect
surprised.
that. I didn't expect that off the Apple side.
Because they
more than anything
started on
else. Yeah.
Android apps running on Windows, and then they've extended the olive branch further. I was surprised.
The actual event was just absolutely just meh. I kind of could skip over all of it. The only thing I want to talk about is actually what happened at the end.
What happened at the end?
So they talked about Microsoft Designer, this new application they built for designers, and they mentioned and showed DALL-E 2 integrated into it.
Ooh.
So, a few weeks ago, we put it on YouTube, and we had that whole, you needed a slide with some knights filling up an EV or whatever it was. And we tried Stable Diffusion and what was the other one, Midjourney, and we were just trying to do this. They now have DALL-E 2 licensed to actually do it within the designer. So he gave an example of like blue confetti falling onto a stage.
That's incredible.
And it pulled it in.
Yeah.
And then they said, not only that, we're now going to introduce it into Bing. So instead of image search, you now have Image Creator, which will basically create the image you're looking for through Bing. And I was like, it happened quicker than I thought. Like we did that a few months. Well,
like the licensing is surprising, right? So this is if they throw enough money at this, then people will use Bing.
And not just that. Like, it's a very small step to go from Microsoft Designer to PowerPoint. They're basically the same thing. It's probably one going to replace the other, right? So
what actually is Microsoft Designer?
It's a new thing. I think it's basically they're trying to compete with like Illustrator and the kind of and probably things like Canva and all the other creative products. They're trying to do that, but by putting DALL-E in there is quite interesting. Because a few months ago they had a big demo where they were trying out DALL-E with some students and some kids in India actually, and they at the developer conference they were showing, here's how generative AI art works. And I was like, that's interesting that they're working with DALL-E, but then to get it into a product and launch it, it's a lot faster than I thought. It was the one thing where I sat up and went, we need to do our pod because this has happened quicker than I thought. And it's just people like me, people like you, people who try and communicate and are knowledge workers for a living will need to figure this out and get good at this pretty damn quick. Because as I've realized, it doesn't replace people, but actually a creative person using one of these AI art generators will get better results than a less creative person. So it doesn't like magic. It doesn't replace your creativity. If you're really creative and you can give it the right prompts, you can come up with a much better result
it's a lever. It's a multiplier.
It
massively
right?
extends your power.
So I'm not sure whether people think it's going to somehow like level the playing field, but actually it might just create a bigger chasm for people, because the really creative, artistic people who can clutch onto any form of like knowledge that they can add into the prompts and know how to assemble them properly, and then can apply Photoshop or other design creativity on top of it, will just get infinitely better results than people who just go, show me a dog that's yellow. It's like you're not going to be impressed with that. Anyway, it was the best thing from the event. Everything else was kind of boring.
What do you think that licensing agreement looked like?
Lots of zeros.
So this is of Midjourney, or is it licensing?
No, DALL-E 2.
DALL-E 2.
So DALL-E 2. So the whole OpenAI piece, I guess it's a capacity model.
They're for profit.
I think DALL-E 2 is licensed for profit, but OpenAI is a foundation. So I don't know how it works actually, but I'd imagine with Microsoft, because it's baked into the Office 365 side, and because it has to have things like content moderation and all the other stuff, there's probably like you're not directly talking with DALL-E 2 APIs. There's a middle layer where they just make sure it's the nice stuff that comes through, and that it's
maybe it's something like
not copyright infringement. Those type of things.
Host it on Azure. We'll host you on Azure if you let us use this for free, because we'll be the main people driving throughput through it.
Yeah, probably.
Something like that.
And there's probably then the user-based reinforcement learning, right? Of just knowing what people are doing and what queries they're putting, and then you can go back and retrain things. So,
but you're right
it was
about
kinda
the
cool.
moderation. Like they must be spinning up a really elaborate moderation team around this.
I have no idea how to do it. Moderating generative AI is more or less impossible. So,
Well, the prompts that you're allowed to enter and the ones that get filtered blocked out, but also making sure that the input imagery is legit kosher and doesn't lead to sort of systemic biases.
literally impossible, because you're ingesting millions of images that are just labeled images, and so you're gonna have artists.
They're in the public domain.
Yeah, but you're gonna have like loads of artists, loads of illustrators, loads of like magazine covers. There's so much stuff, and it's all been labeled in different ways, and you don't really know how the fuzzy logic and the machine learning and the many generations of training is going to end up with your prompt coming up with a bit from this one artist's stuff creatively woven in. It's going to be so hard to unpick whether it actually stole it from some artist or whether it's just the AI thinking that looks good because it looks good. And yeah, I don't know how they're doing moderation. I think it will be more about like nudity or profanity and those things.
And now, finally, to Meta.
Meta's very exciting. Did you watch it? Did you watch any of it?
No. Not going to. But what's weird is they are making money. They're making money. They're making, having spent 2 billion, they've made 1 billion. So like in the Quest store, on apps and hardware. So they are making money, which is weird.
That is really weird. That's one thing I didn't pick up on. There was a really interesting article that got put on The Verge just before this event, where the memo had leaked from the head of Horizon Worlds in Meta, who was sending this email to all the employees being like, come on guys, you need to use Horizon Worlds. If you don't use it, how do you expect our customers to use it? And it's like, that's really awkward. That being said, the hardware tech bit, the Quest Pro, from a technology, we'd like to talk about tech, from a tech and hardware perspective, it's kind of incredible, actually. Like, ignore the
Quest
stuff
the
we
Quest
talk about.
Pro is the $1,000 one?
No, it's, I think you're right, maybe $1,499, yeah, $1,500 basically. I don't know who the audience is, unless a bit like the HoloLens. Maybe they're targeting a very like enterprise level user who needs it for something with its like 1 hour battery life. So it's like they're productive for just like an hour a day and then they charge it. I don't know, but
it's really got a 1 hour battery life. Is that true?
I think it can go to 90 minutes. That was from some reviews I've seen. They've got a curved cell battery in the back. It's a lot lighter. They've got these pancake lenses at the front, so it's not like big and heavy. It's open sided, so you can kind of sense the world, your peripheral vision, unless you intentionally block it out. And everything is focused around AR, so your cameras and everything is like showing you yourself, which is...
It's not a pass-through, it's a camera recording the outside world and then showing it to you on the screen.
Yeah, but but with like no lag and like with real...
No lag.
A kind of weird thing. That was quite interesting.
And
much
this
higher
time...
pixel density, like everything just a better improvement. Yeah.
Okay. Avatars have legs.
I was thinking about it. I was like, actually, put 1,000 people in a room in the metaverse, rendering legs and walking. It's a lot of computational problems, right? So I know why they did it. I get why people have been like, come on now, I need legs. There was a weird... Can we just talk about the event a bit? Because there was this moment where like there's Mark Zuckerberg meeting people, walking around, I assume, the Meta campus. And there's like this weird situation where like they feel a bit standoffish with him, but they're talking, but they're confused because they don't know whether to talk to him or to talk to the camera. But he is pretty certain that he's only going to talk to the camera. So he's like, I hear you. Let me talk to the people behind the lens. And then it's just a weird situation Well, like they can't work out. Do they keep trying to make eye contact even though he's not going to do it, or do they just give up and then just point their eyes at the camera, and then they're turning to him and he's looking at the camera and they're just like talking? And yeah, maybe it did feel truly meta. Like it really did feel weird that I was like, I'm the one they're talking to, me in the camera. But they're like staging it as if they're having a chat through the campus. So it's like, it's really awkward. It's definitely worth a watch. I was like analysing it thinking, this is so weirdly uncomfortable.
There was a similar dynamic last year, wasn't there? When it's basically the problem with him and his direct reports. Or indirect reports. Anyone who's employed by him, it's very unclear how he wants to be interacted with.
Maybe that's it, but it makes it, just don't stage it like that. Do it to camera. Don't try and, I've just bumped with you at the lift, let's walk out and have a chat about the direction of it with this strange camera pointing at me. It's just like, don't do it in that way.
Are people going to have business meetings in Meta Horizon Worlds?
Microsoft Teams integration was an interesting one. So they did the whole collab with Microsoft in a really interesting way where it was like xCloud gaming, streaming to VR. So you've got an Xbox, you can use the Quest. That was quite cool. Microsoft Teams, whatever it's called, you can like plug in, so you can literally join a call through this, which is again an interesting one.
What would you look like when you joined the call?
Well, this is the interesting thing, right? So they showed these codec avatars, which, to be fair, technically are very impressive, right? You can do the full 3D scan with a laser thing, or you can just hold your phone and you can very quickly scan your face. And it picks up on all the, like, you know, your like eye raises and smiles and all this stuff, so that when you're virtually in it, even wearing a headset, it'll pick up on those relatively well if you've done it. So you might be in a meeting where, like, you know, sometimes you're on video call meetings and some people do put the video on, some people don't. And some people, they put the video over, they don't have a camera like this. It's like looking at their face, and there's like a different experience for every different video caller. And now you're going to have like the different body language that you can read from the person with all the gadgets and the latest Quest thing versus someone else who it's just, they're going to be just the face of mozzarella. There's no emotion whatsoever. And it reminded me of you know that scene in Snow Crash where Hiro, the protagonist of it, is like gets into a samurai fight with someone, samurai sword fight, and the other person's got a really bad connection and it's like a low fidelity one, whereas he's got the high end stuff. It felt like that. It felt very Snow Crash, that you actually now have this like this real divide between, say everyone does start using the metaverse, there's going to be the high end, you can tell I'm the coolest everything badass person, versus I'm literally a whatever, I don't even have legs. Like I floated in here because I couldn't get the legs to work.
While we were away, on the topic of user numbers, while we were away, DAP Radar was suggesting that Decentraland only has 38 daily active users.
Oh yeah, Andy sent me that. Do you know how they calculated that? So I looked into it.
No.
So they described it as active users. Now, for me, active users is someone who logged in and uses the platform. They were counting unique wallets that interact with the smart contract. I.e., they bought or sold a NFT within. You don't need to log in and just use it. You don't need to. So it's not active users in any sense of it. It's just completely absurd, you know. And I thought that was a really disingenuous figure. On the Meta event, one thing from it that I thought was really cool, which acts a bit like the Microsoft one, like it was the thing that they weren't focusing on, but it was really cool. They've done a lot of research into, like, you wear this wearable and it can sense your motor neuron signals and then it can translate that into controls. And they showed people who literally moving their fingers just the tiniest amount to control the game, to go left, go right, jump, everything, just by small, like, physical movements. And I thought that was actually very, very interesting, because unlike the Neuralink stuff where it's like, we'll implant in your brain and blah, 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 and read your brain signals, they were like, no. Your body's already doing a lot of this. Like, why don't we just read what the signals are to your hands and stuff, and that's how you interact. And I thought that's brilliant. I thought the research going into that, it's very, very interesting, and may actually be the saving grace for Meta longer term, in my view, because I just think this whole VR, AR direction they're heading is just completely stupid. Whereas that wearable user interface thing, super, super useful. Can you imagine a million ways that that's actually extremely valuable if they do a good job with it. Yeah, there was one before we finish up. There's one more thing. This whole metaverse stuff, we are always really critical of, and it's like mainly because of the focus on VR and immersion and stuff. Did you know back in 2006, IBM put $10 million into Second Life, and it was only 3 years later, in 2009, that they pulled out of all of that, and their chief metaverse evangelist, that was the role at the time, said this isn't working out, it's not really reaping rewards, and they pulled out of it. That was back in 2006, 2009. So we've been down this road before with the kind of fascination around VR game world things, and it hasn't worked out. And it did make me think that's actually funny how that feels like history repeating itself. It might be different now. Maybe the technology maybe it's different now, but it does feel similar, given that Second Life was actually a pretty solid thing that had a lot of users and that still couldn't quite scale to the level that they were going for. Anyway, I'll leave you with that.
I guess what my takeaway there is that this alternate reality, augmented or virtual, is something that it's very easy to fall for in corporate world and place a really big bet on. I think that might be the takeaway. Yeah. And we still don't know for sure if this was a terrible move by Zuckerberg. But like I say, that's weird, isn't it? That there was a 1 billion revenue from the Quest store. 1 billion revenue on apps and hardware in the Quest store, having invested 2 billion.
It's kind of interesting though, isn't it? It's like knowing what makes up the 1 billion. Is it that first set of users, their company gets them a device, they're forced to go in, they buy one game each, and that's the peak, and then they never use it again. Is that it? Is it sustainable? And is that the right revenue model generally for this stuff? I think there's loads of questions. My main thought about Meta is it might be one of those weird ones where in 10 years' time we look back on it and we see all of the spin-offs that come out of this great research into the hardware and the motor neuron sensing and the VR technology and everything, the same way we look at like AWS for Amazon, that it's like something will come from that is actually worth way more than Horizon Worlds. And maybe that's where the Meta's future actually lies, and that's where it becomes one of the most valuable companies again. Who knows?
And it's looking like health and fitness might be the sort of surprise win in all of this. That could be the breakthrough killer app.
There's quite a few that could come through that just aren't strap on a headset and hang out with people who have legs. Yeah.
So wait, do we need to say goodbye or something?
Yeah, no, we should probably say goodbye.
Wow. Well, let's not leave it so long next time.
We'll have a new one soon. Right, I'll speak to you in a bit.
Started during lockdown, needed something to do. They looked at each other, they said, hey, I like talking to you. And so from a garden shed in a box room in West London,